Hey, mamas. Just as a reminder, I am Aubrey Phelps. I'm a registered functional nutritionist and I specialize in perinatal and pediatric nutrition. I also have my pre and postnatal fitness certification and am a certified lactation counselor. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about PCOS. I have some notes, so if you see me glancing down, I'm not ignoring. I'm just checking some notes that I had made so I can cover everything. And I'll repeat this again at the end. But if you would like to ask some questions, I pre recorded this so that I could put it on at our usual slot. But I don't want you to feel like you can't ask questions. So please feel free to comment in the post, ask questions. I'll be checking in, especially if you tag me. I'll be sure to see it. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have that come out of this. So, for those who aren't familiar, PCOS actually stands for polycystic ovary syndrome, and that's when one of the classic signs of PCOS is just what it sounds like, that you have many cystic cysts within the ovary. So instead of every month you should be releasing an egg, and instead of that egg getting released, it essentially stays, doesn't get fully released, and those can create these cysts. So seeing a lot of those is very indicative of this syndrome because of the hormonal cascade that happens that doesn't allow for ovulation. That's one of the other really key symptoms of PCOS, is that you have irregular periods or really long cycles, and essentially they're long because you're not ovulating. Once you ovulate, your period is going to happen unless you get pregnant within about 10 to 14 days. We like to see closer to 12, but that's another talk. But with PCOS, if you don't ovulate until day 30 of your cycle, then your cycle ends up being like 45 days long. So it's very common to see either no ovulation throughout the cycle, or having really irregular long cycles. Way over like 35 days is kind of the max we would expect for a normal period. This is a really common condition. About 1 in 10 women are estimated to have PCOS, and there are varying levels of that. One of the really big misnomers is this idea that you have to be overweight to have PCOS, and that's just not true. Having excess weight absolutely increases the risk because of the relationship to insulin and blood sugar control and inflammation, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it is not a requirement. You can be quite fit. Many athletes actually have PCOS because of the intense exercise that they're doing, which can also contribute. So I just want to kind of get that out there, because often people assume that if you're not overweight, you can't have PCOS, and that's just not true. We don't quite understand the mechanism behind what causes PCOS. What we do know is that it has to do with insulin resistance. So a very brief little biochem lesson here, in that insulin is a hormone that moves glucose out of your bloodstream into your cells. So it's you get an influx of blood sugar, you eat a banana, you have a piece of toast, whatever it is, and your pancreas creates insulin. Insulin comes and knocks on the cell doors and says, "Hello, do you need any sugar? Open up, let some of this in so that it can stabilize blood sugar levels and get the glucose into the cells that need it." So insulin resistance, I like to use the analogy, if you've heard the story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. So the idea is that your insulin just keeps knocking and saying, "Hey, do you want some? Do you want some? Do you want some?" And the cell finally says, "I'm not listening to you. You keep asking, and I've already told you I don't want any, and you just keep coming by." So what happens is, in order for the cells to open up and say, "Yes, we'll accept some of the blood sugar," insulin has to go up more and more and more to get the signal. It has to become louder and louder and louder. And so you get this, the effect is that your body has higher blood sugar levels because your body is resistant to the insulin. So your body is not actually able to respond to the insulin, which is problematic. So your blood sugar levels stay high because it can't get out of the system. And this creates this feedback cycle where your body says, oh, shoot, blood sugar's high. We should pump out more insulin. So, insulin resistance and those consequential metabolic cascades that happen because of this are really indicative of the PCOS diagnosis and condition. There is a genetic component. So if your mom or your sister has PCOS, yes, you have a higher likelihood of having PCOS, but it is not a foregone conclusion. With lifestyle, with diet, we can absolutely affect that genetic component, but just being aware of that can help you make better choices, especially as you're becoming an adult and getting ready to try and have children, etc., and to prepare your own child for it. Because if there's something in the genetic history, you at least have some heads up that might be a problem. So one of the big things about this, because some people will say like, okay, PCOS, so what's the big deal? Like, I don't have a period very often. Cool. Like, that's kind of nice, right? Well, the issue becomes that with PCOS, you have a much higher likelihood of having fertility issues. Infertility is actually about 10 times higher in women that suffer from PCOS, as well as PCOS contributing to 90% of ovulatory disorders. So when you don't ovulate or you're not ovulating consistently, 90% of the time that's linked to PCOS, and 75% of anovulatory infertility. So 75% of the infertility cases where you're not ovulating are related to PCOS. If you do get pregnant and you have PCOS, it also increases your likelihood of pregnancy complications and your risk of miscarriage 20 to 40%. So it's pretty significant. It's something you want to keep in mind. So we really want to try and keep this under control and do what we can to make sure that your cycles are regular, and that even if you have had a history of PCOS, there are ways to reverse it. It's something you'll always have to keep in mind, but there's a way to reverse that so that you can have regular cycles and you can have normal cycles and you can get pregnant without doing a lot of medications. Because the medications like Clomid, things that are going to force ovulation, essentially, they might force ovulation, but they don't do anything with the underlying problem, the underlying root cause of why you're suffering from the PCOS. So it doesn't get rid of all the imbalances behind the scenes, which is really important as we're going to go into, because there are ripple down effects of that. So not only does PCOS affect your fertility and your cycle health, but it increases your likelihood of developing diabetes, which increases your likelihood of developing heart disease and metabolic syndrome and becoming overweight. And so there's a whole ripple down effect that if this isn't on, all these negative future health outcomes can happen. So that's part of the reason that even if you're like, well, I'm not looking to get pregnant, I don't want to get pregnant, I never want babies, whatever, there are a lot of other reasons that we want to address PCOS, regardless as to what your family planning goals are. So let's jump into the symptoms. Now, I want to remind everybody, this is not, I'm not diagnosing things I'm saying right now. If you're like, oh my gosh, I check all of those off, that does not mean you have PCOS. We can't just immediately say that. Many of these things are linked to other issues, like thyroid disorders, and other hormone issues. So we can't assume that that's the problem, but just kind of as a heads up, if you're like, something's been off, nobody's listening to me, here are the most common symptoms we see with PCOS. Infertility is one of the most common. Women just really not being able to get pregnant despite all they're doing. Irregular periods and long gaps between periods, which I mentioned earlier. That's a classic hallmark sign of PCOS. And that assumes that you're not nursing, that you haven't recently been pregnant, didn't recently miscarry, and aren't recently off birth control. All of those things in and of themselves can affect your cycle regularity, but this is just, nope, day in and day out, here we are, and I never know when my period's going to happen. Acne, especially along this jawline, cystic acne, is a very common symptom, as well as weight gain or inability to lose weight, that you're doing all the right things, eating all the right stuff, working with the right people, and it's just not budging. Also facial hair and hair thinning or loss, kind of like the male pattern baldness. Those are all very linked to PCOS. As are binge eating disorders, we don't know exactly what that mechanism is, but that we think it has something to do with the blood sugar irregularities. So again, remember with PCOS, we have insulin resistance, so our body is not utilizing the blood sugar as well as it should. So kind of what happens is that we keep pumping out more and more and more insulin, and finally the cells respond, and now there's a ton of insulin and there's a huge uptake of all the sugar out of the blood, and now our blood sugar levels plummet and our body goes, whoa, we got to stabilize that. So then you get the signal from your body that you need to eat something. Like now you become hangry because your system is trying to regulate its blood sugar. So it doesn't necessarily have to do with actual hunger, but the body trying to regulate the blood sugar. And essentially with that insulin resistance, it overcompensates. So we go back and forth of blood sugar's too high, pump out lots and lots and lots of insulin. Oh, finally we respond too much. And oh, now the blood sugar's really low. Quick, eat something. Blood sugar goes back high, insulin gets pumped out. Oh, so it's this vicious cycle once you're in that. We also see that anxiety and depression are increased in those with PCOS. And again, we don't have a sense of which came first. Was the anxiety and depression linked to the PCOS? Because there's a hormonal component there that can affect your, the stress hormones affect your sex hormones. So because you were anxious or depressed, did that lead to hormonal imbalance that became PCOS? Or do those with PCOS have this effect that they tend to have more anxiety and depression? We don't know that. But it is something to be aware of, that if you have been diagnosed with PCOS, especially being aware that what you're feeling as a type A personality, or, oh, it's just the blues or whatever, it might actually be related to the PCOS. And again, getting that PCOS under control can help with the anxiety and the depression. So I know I threw a lot at you, but I wanted to kind of give a basics for what this looks like to start before we jump into, okay, so what can I do about it? So the relationship here, what happens in PCOS, and again, this condition is not well understood. For a very long time, it was kind of relegated as just a gynecological issue, and we didn't do much beyond like putting women on birth control or putting them on Clomid or doing fertility treatments, and that was kind of the focus. We're now coming to understand that there are a ton of diet and lifestyle components that can absolutely help manage PCOS, often without any other intervention. So because of that, the research is still pretty early in terms of what's causing this and what can we do about it. What we do know is that the relationship has to do with this insulin resistance. So I wrote down this little like pathway so that I could try and explain it. It's quite complicated. I'll tell you that, because I was trying to find a really nice graphic to share with you, and it's just not. There's so many, when we talk hormones, you cannot affect one hormone without having a ripple down effect somewhere else. It just doesn't work. For example, I'll use a simpler example. So the pregnenolone steal is what we talk about when someone's stressed. So we are coming down the hormone pathway, and there reaches a point where the hormone can be converted and go to cortisol, stress hormone, okay? Or it can be converted and go to progesterone, sex hormone. As we're coming down this chain, if you are stressed and you have chronic stress, this gets shunted to the cortisol. We just keep making cortisol. Well, if we're doing that, we're taking all the resources and we can't make progesterone. So this is when you're going to have low progesterone, and you can have issues with progesterone because of stress. That's why we say stress impacts your cycle. It literally impacts it. It steals the components necessary for proper hormone function. So the same relationship starts to happen here. Your body hormones are, so they're endocrine, coming from endocrine orders. And what that means is they are something that an endocrine organ is an organ that uses hormones to send a message to somewhere else in the body. So for example, the pituitary gland is responsible for making several of our hormones, like our FSH, it's a follicle stimulating hormone, LH. So those affect the ovaries, but the pituitary is in charge. The pituitary up here says, hey, we need to release an egg. Ovary, you need to release an egg. Well, how does it send that message? Through a hormone. And the hormone hits, and the ovary says, oh, we need to send an egg out. Okay, cool. So whenever a hormone is out of balance, it sends a different message, essentially. We're giving a different message every time. So with insulin resistance, when your body is pumping out more insulin than it's supposed to, there's increased insulin in the blood system, and insulin is a storage hormone. So it tells the body that we should store. And by that, I mean, we should store fat. Okay. And that's part of why it's hard to lose weight, because if your insulin levels are high, the message insulin sends is we should be using our resources. Don't break down. Don't utilize them for fuel. We're going to store them. As insulin goes up, testosterone goes up, and that's produced by the ovaries. So as that testosterone goes up, that's what causes the acne we see and the facial hair growth down around here, because testosterone obviously is mostly a male hormone. So we want that imbalance in females. We absolutely have it and need it, but in terms of proportion, it's much lower in women than in men. So that testosterone will produce male-like symptoms and physical manifestations. And so that's why we see the male pattern baldness, we see the cystic acne, and we see the facial hair. So the other thing that happens is testosterone goes up. It sends a signal to decrease a hormone called sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG. So this is a compound that will typically kind of scavenge excess hormone and help keep things in balance. But the increase in insulin tells the body to make more testosterone, which tells the body to produce less of this globulin. So the ultimate response is that you have more testosterone in the system. And this is a hallmark sign of our PCOS pattern. One of the things to keep in mind too is if you're getting testing done for PCOS, because I see this, that clients will say, well, all my levels were in a normal level. Everything was normal. I can't have PCOS. That's not quite accurate. Part of what we're looking at is the ratios of things. So for example, your LH, your luteinizing hormone, the hormone that actually releases the egg, and your FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, so the hormone that tells the body, okay, get ready to push a follicle out, push an egg out to prepare it for ovulation. They have a wide range of normal, but if we're seeing the LH elevated compared to the FSH, they might both be in the normal range, like the LH is 16 and the FSH is 3, and those are both normal. But the ratio of LH to FSH is considerably higher. LH is like a 3-to-1. So when we see like a 3-to-1 ratio, that's still a red flag that there's an issue. So that's something to keep in mind, is that oftentimes our providers just kind of look at, oh, it's in the normal range, it's fine. It's a little more nuanced than that. Just because it's in the normal range doesn't mean that there's not an issue. There's a difference between normal and optimal. And what's normal is often not what's optimal. So that's something to keep in mind. That's part of what I do when I do my functional certification, is looking at what's optimal. So not just what will keep us from dying, essentially, and keep us functioning, but what will keep us healthy, what will keep us thriving instead. So just something to keep in mind, because that's often missed. So what can we do? Right? Like, I think that's what a lot of us are wondering. So what do I do? You say there's stuff I can do. What is it? So there are a few different things, and I am going to give you some kind of basic overviews. I can't give you specifics because that would be unethical for me to give you specifics without having a full assessment, because everybody is going to be different and their needs are going to be different. But some general recommendations for helping get PCOS under control. Here's the good news. Just about everything I'm going to tell you applies whether you have PCOS or not. These are good things to do just in general to reduce inflammation, reduce the toxic burden on the body, to improve blood sugar levels, and to get pregnant and stay pregnant. So all of these things are good regardless. So one of the first things looking at nutrition, the only thing that's going to raise insulin, because if PCOS is a product of insulin resistance, or if that's a major component, then one of the things we absolutely want to do is keep insulin down and regulated, right? So the only thing you're eating that's going to raise insulin is carbohydrates, because when your blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up. So that does not mean we go keto. That does not mean we go no carb. That's not what I'm saying. However, a lower moderate carb diet is often really beneficial. This can help improve blood sugar levels and thereby improve insulin levels. So what does that look like? That means focusing on vegetables first, non-starchy vegetables, not corn, not potatoes. I know, I see you Midwestern girls. It means our leafy greens, our cruciferous, especially our broccoli, our cauliflower, our kale, our cabbage, our bok choy, carrots, beets, bell peppers, all of those. It means focusing on those first and focusing then on whole fruits. So not fruit juice, okay? Not too many dried fruits, because dried fruits have taken out a lot of the like hydration that you get from them. So it defeats some of the purpose, and that often the heat processing destroys some of the nutrients. So whole, real foods. Berries are awesome. Apples with the peel, those sorts of things. And then your next level of carbohydrates, so vegetables and fruits are both carbohydrates. Your next level of carbohydrates, getting a little bit more and more carby as we go, would be like legumes, like lentils and beans. These have a lot of really good, they do have some carbs. They're a higher carb, but they also have protein, and they have something called inositol, which is a compound that's been shown to help regulate insulin and blood sugar. So they're a really good source of that, and that's a good option too if those are something you tolerate. So beans, lentils, those are great. So what I am not talking about is like a lot of breads and pastas, and that's where we really want to cut down. We want to try and avoid your breads, your pastas, your pastries, your cookies. All of those things are going to be less beneficial. It doesn't mean we never have them. It just means that that's something we use as like an accent to the meal rather than the primary focus of the meal. The other thing is thinking about, I say no naked carbs. So by that, I mean, we don't just eat a carb in isolation. So an apple is not a snack. An apple with peanut butter is a snack. An apple with cheese is a snack, but it has to be paired with some protein or fat. And the reason for this is it slows digestion, so you're not going to get that big blood sugar rush, and it helps you feel fuller longer, so you're less likely to start eating other things. So this is going to help stabilize blood sugar levels, and you're not going to get those big ups and downs, which is part of what we're trying to avoid. So another thing you can do, weight loss, if warranted. This is not a across the board, everyone should lose weight. We did see that in women that have a BMI of 30 or above, and especially have a waist circumference of 35 or more inches, that 5 to 10% weight loss makes a drastic difference in their fertility, in their cycle, and in their PCOS management. So that's something to keep in mind and to try and focus on if you fall into that category. For vegetables, I know we talked about, I mentioned we want to increase them, but to give you some sense of what you want to be doing, I like to have my clients aiming for about 9 handfuls, like good handfuls, not baby handfuls, of vegetables, fruits and vegetables every day. And the reason for that is that if you're aiming for 9 and you hit 6, that's still really, really good. But you need that fiber, you need those micronutrients. That's all going to be really helpful. So it takes a concerted effort to get that amount of fruits and vegetables in during your day. One of the other things you can do is decrease alcohol and decrease caffeine, especially if you're having a lot of PCOS symptoms, suffering for infertility, etc. Sometimes that can be entered back in once we kind of stabilize things, but definitely something to keep in mind if you need a little bit extra oomph, and that's something you can cut out. Those will definitely impact blood sugar levels and impact your overall hormonal balance. Sorry, I had to address a child, so I'm hoping this will work when I came back on. So I know we were talking about caffeine and alcohol, so reducing those. Um, some women find reducing dairy to be helpful, to eliminate dairy, at least initially, that can help. Um, then beyond kind of those specific nutrition things, lifestyle wise, I mentioned earlier that athletes sometimes have this. So, too much exercise can actually increase stress, which can increase our blood sugar levels, which can increase our insulin. So, while exercise is great for blood sugar management and for weight loss and for keeping the body healthy, excessive or really extreme exercise is not. I see a lot of clients that are under eating and overtraining, and it's very common for us to see a lot of issues with their cycle when we see that pattern. So, if you are someone who is working out like every day, really hard, like CrossFit style, high intensity interval training, all of that, one of the things to consider is to back down on that and add in some more restorative movements like yoga, like a nice slow hike, like just a nice walk around the neighborhood or some easy biking, something that's not necessarily going to make you really break a sweat. Adding that in can have a really positive effect on your hormone balance. Um, Stress management and sleep in general are really important. So, again, keeping those cortisol levels down. Cortisol increases inflammation, which increases blood sugar levels, which increases insulin levels. So, there's just a ripple down effect that's going to cause problems when you have the stress and the sleep issues. So, when I say good sleep, I mean like 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep. If you're waking up in the morning and you feel like death, that's not quality sleep. If you're waking up every 30 minutes, every hour, every 2 hours, that's not quality sleep. So that's something that you want to really keep in mind. I know a lot of us, especially right now, are doing a lot of our work after our kids are in bed, and that makes it hard to stay off of our electronics late into the night, which is really the ideal. So an alternative option is the blue light filter glasses. I own a pair and I'll throw them on after I put the kids to bed. So then any work I'm doing on the computer or on my phone, I at least am filtering out that blue light, which affects our circadian rhythms. So that's an option to kind of like cheat and be able to still do the work you need to do or relax and watch a TV show or whatever it is, while also trying to support healthy sleep habits. For some of the other things to think about are daily bowel movements. So there's so many, so I wrote them down because I didn't want to miss any. Daily bowel movements are going to help with cleaning out excess hormones. So if you don't have daily bowel movements, whenever I work with clients and they don't have daily bowel movements, that's one of the very first things we try to establish. It's key to making sure that hormones are healthy. So daily bowel movements are a big thing. Increasing movement can help with that, as can ground flax. So I like ground flax a lot. It helps both with hormone balance as well as provides good fiber that can help with regular bowel movements. And then clean products. So by that I mean trying to avoid chemicals and endocrine disruptors and anything that's going to affect your hormones. So hormones in your food, plastics, heating food in plastics, personal care products, those are all likely to disrupt your endocrine system, your hormone system. And if you already have a hormone imbalance like PCOS, you're just adding fuel to the fire every time you increase those imbalances in any way. So that's another place to kind of look, well, where can I clean up my act? As far as supplements, I mentioned like the ground flaxseed. Vitamin D is another huge one. I think people have been told that they like have this notion that they can get enough from the sun. And the reality is, especially if you are a local person here in Ohio, there are only like 4 months in the entire year that the sun is at the right angle to the earth, that at this latitude, we can actually make vitamin D from being out in the sun. And in those 4 months, it's for this very small window of time each day. So if you're not essentially outside with like just a tank top and shorts on every day during those windows, you're not making enough vitamin D. It's really uncommon for people to have adequate vitamin D because we're not laboring outside all day basically every day anymore. It's just not happening. So vitamin D is almost always something I recommend. It's been shown to help with PCOS as well as helping with insulin and blood sugar management. Adaptogens are another one. I've spoken about this on another chat we did. Adaptogens help with your stress response. So that can be helpful, just kind of support your adrenals and calm everything down. But ultimately, one of the things I would say, like a key takeaway from this, and the first thing I start with clients, is asking yourself, what can I add? So what have we talked about today that you can add? And what can I take away? Because trying to do all of this at once, it's overwhelming. It was overwhelming for me to write this stuff down, to remember what to tell you guys, let alone to just like, all right, tomorrow I'm implementing it. So think about it. Think about what we've talked about. Ask questions, like please comment, ask questions, and think about what really is doable. Is it doable for you to go to bed an hour earlier so you can actually get 7 to 8 hours of sleep? Is that something you could add? Could you take out those chips that you have every night for a snack? Could you replace that with carrot chips or apple with peanut butter or something else so you don't have that naked carb? What can you add in and what can you remove? And every week, every month, whatever, we want to think about more things that we can add and we can remove as the new thing becomes a habit. And eventually you get to this whole list. Eventually you've covered all of it. But we want to do it step by step. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for almost certain failure. It's just too much too soon, and you're not going to have a chance to integrate it into your patterns. And so then it's just become overwhelming, and then you just quit altogether. So for more tailored ideas on if you want to work very specifically, obviously, please reach out. I'm happy to. I'm taking new clients, and I'm happy to work with you. But I hope this gave you some ideas of things you can start implementing. And most importantly, I want you to feel like if you know this is an issue, if you know PCOS is an issue for you, or you've been battling it and you really don't want to go the drug route, or you were on birth control and you really want to get off and try and have a baby, and how are you going to do that because you have PCOS? I hope that this gave you some idea of how much control how much say you really do have in your health and in how you can impact your cycles. I know it's a lot and it's definitely not an easy road, but there is so much that you can do. And there are many, many, many women who have PCOS and have been able to reverse a lot of its effects and have great insulin management, great blood sugar management, have regular cycles, and have beautiful, healthy pregnancies. Thanks for letting me chat with you guys this evening. And please remember, if you have questions, just add them in the comments below, and I will definitely be checking in and responding as needed. Or if you have a private question, feel free to PM me. That's fine too. I'm happy to help. Thanks.